There is a ghost town high up in the Montana mountains, not far from Yellowstone. Few people are aware of it. Long ago, the only way in and out deteriorated into disrepair. To get there, you'll need some intermediate climbing skills. It can only be attempted when the weather is dry and warm, which is about to a time frame of a few months each year. My granddad discussed it once. Pop was never a character in the story, and the details were lost in the fog of memory, to decorate once his memory fizzled. He had heard it as a child, about a silver mine in the mountains and a creature who lived in the forest. It was no bear, it was no wolf. It didn't matter because the miners weren't allowed to share the land and the new town was built to help them. After that, there was a massacre. The survivors left the community and never came back. I and Taylor went hiking and camping for a week in Yellowstone National Park last summer. The weather was kind to us. We went off the grid and had a wonderful time. The last evening, close to a murmuring fire, we guaranteed we would rehash it. I told her about the abandoned town as the firmament above the North Star rotated. We inhaled the story in. That is where we would go. The promise of spring makes a harsh winter bearable. However, summer remained my primary focus. A prolonged vacation in the mountains and a break from school. When you can do exactly what you want, it's a rare treat. Unbridled elation was brought on by the sun's warmth. The wait was nearly complete. We drove to the furthest extent that we would be able, wrapping our direction up between mountains deprived of the white covers of winter and spread with green and blue and brown. On the side of a lonely dirt road, Taylor stopped the car by rolling it over. The sun's heat was subdued by the crisp mountain air. We climbed with our packs on our shoulders. We knew very little about what was left of the abandoned town. The officers fingered it on a guide, however none had been up there. The location was a learned skill. My granddad could figure concerning the whereabouts. He had stated that it was somewhere up there. When I told him our plans and that his story was the inspiration for where we were going, the smile gave way to contemplation. He advised me to watch out. He wasn't to worry, I told him. The higher we went, the spruce trees became less dense. We mixed up a rough shoulder and Taylor really looked at the guide. We were standing firm. We would reach there before sunset if luck were on our side. We had to take a detour that took us a couple of hours due to an impassable portion of vertical rock face. It would need to be tomorrow. With a view of our destination across the plain, we camped in a clearing. Somewhere far off, the trees crouched together as though against the cool night air and darkened on the map. I considered what we would find. There was a good chance that nothing was left. Maybe a couple of stumps where a simple wooden house once stood. We directed our concentration toward the sky and looked for meteorites and concurred it didn't make any difference. In the middle of the night, Taylor woke me up. Over the mountains, a half-moon hung low. Her murmured words turned out in explodes. They took some time to come together for me in my hazy brain. Something had sounded to her. The loud and sharp crack of a tree branch like it had been snapped like a twig. And there was light now. In the pale silver gleam of the moon, I followed her outstretched hand. Hanging simply over the skyline, a yellow light glinted. It gave the impression of a candle consuming in a window. But over here there were no windows and nobody to consume a light. I was only able to provide hazy solutions. An optical stunt played by some air irregularity. A group of hunters gathered around a campfire, despite the fact that this was not a typical location for such gatherings. In any case, it lay far enough away to represent no risk. It was not stated by either of us that it was in our travel direction. We lay down. I periodically opened my right eye to see if the light had returned. It did. And afterward, I rested. We set off in the direction of the abandoned town after barely speaking all night. I was restless to reveal an ordinary clarification for the light we saw the prior night. The remaining parts of an open-air fire or some loner living alone up in the mountains. The manner in which Taylor kept her eyes on the trees ahead let me know she was thinking something very similar. We entered the thick forest section. The trees developed close and obstructed the sun. Our bare legs were scratched by stray branches. The ground undulated, and I wound up naturally following it down. Furthermore, soon I was muddled. Taylor took out the guide and the GPS. She turned her attention to the map when for some reason the GPS failed to provide a signal. I moved forward until my boots came into contact with something solid. After a look down, I hopped back. The hard soil was driven into with a wooden stake. I could only make out what had once been above because it had cracked about a foot above the ground. Guess it, however, at that point, More rose up out of between the trees, toward my left to getting full free from them. Wooden crosses organized aimlessly, many of them. My voice was soft and low as I called out to Taylor. I ventured through the graveyard, cautious not to step on the ground straightforwardly before every cross, an old belief that is difficult to shake. The crucifixes were basic, simple wood planks. Rot had taken over some. Others protected all right to peruse an engraving across the level part. Dates and names, 6 people of the same age made up the congregation in the back corner. 7th of December, 1891. My granddad's story, I thought. Taylor said it was probably cholera. Presenting her own argument. We must be close to anything that remains of that town. The ground rose and the spruce became less dense beyond the cemetery. When we reached the top of the slope, we saw it. The town's ruins were on a hard earth plateau. A couple of the wooden houses stayed as complete designs. The lumber twisted and broke and blanched the shade of the ground. A couple of more were feeling much better of rooftops and portions of walls, leaving a delicate remnant of what had been. My eyes cleared up the inclining mountain past where a rusted red appendage of mining gear jabbed over the stones. Taylor moved toward the nearest house and pushed the entryway. The door slammed into the filthy interior, after being gently ripped from its hinge, of the dwelling. Needles from the encompassing tidy littered the floor. She wandered inside. I stayed outside and looked at a pair of timber siding grooves. The weather conditions had worn the edges. I rubbed my fingers across them, pondering what might have left such traces. "This is cool," Taylor said. She was correct. Old bed frames, chairs, and tables that had been left behind before the mountain's water retreated. Other than a single half-buried glass bottle, we didn't find much else. After dumping our gear near the house closest to the graveyard, we began climbing the rock toward the mining gear past. We raced to the top after finding a crude rock-cut staircase. What survived from the mining hardware added up to a outline with a can on rails to get rid of the dirt and some discarded picks. A shaft cut into the earth and was before long gulped by murkiness. The depth was only a guess for us. I mixed up a slant past and sat on a little stone stage with a post over my legs dangling over the side of the valley below. Somewhere far off, the mountains looked blue. We stayed there for a while until the sun shone on the west's peaks. This evening we would camp at the Phantom Town, and we would remain a couple of days. My red windbreaker, lying on the ground next to a half-collapsed person, was the first indication of trouble. House behind the abandoned town. The windbreaker was tightly packed into my backpack when we left. My bag had been damaged in some way. It wouldn't be the initial time. It had been done before by squirrels or birds, but I knew the windbreaker was deep in my bag. It would take a tireless squirrel to get to it. A subsequent choice had my heart pounding. A bear. We had a mess of gear. Our sleeping bags and clothing were scattered all over the ground. The little gas burner was improved. 2 parallel tiers ran from top to bottom in my backpack. Like I had the 2 grooves in the house's siding, I ran my hand over them. There was no squirrel here. Taylor turned her black pan in her hand before picking it up. She showed me. The one side sagged inward. Taylor grasped it and pulled at the metal to bring it back into shape. It didn't move. "A bear," I said. It was necessary. It searched my bag for the bear mace canister. My muscles strained and my hands worked wildly until I tracked down it, put away where I had left it. Basically, we actually had that. We looked through the ground and searched for bear tracks, the distinctive grouping of front and back legs and wide paws. I tracked down a downturn in the ground. With my shoe dwarfed in comparison and no second footprint, I hovered above the footprint. Anything that entered our camp did so on 2 legs, and those legs' bases were exceptional feet. It cannot be right. We are being played with. The print was examined by Taylor. We had never seen anything like it before. I looked west, and the sun was at that point gone. At the horizon, the sky was turning a shade of orange. Light would quickly fade. We had very few choices. Anything it was that had been here was not here at this point. Under the stars, we had planned to camp outside. Be that as it may, with something following the timberland, we moved our camping cots and mats inside one of the houses. At the very least, it offered some level of safety. We took no chances with a fire. Obscurity overpowered the light rapidly and totally. Mists came in from the west at sunset. A light breeze conveyed a weak smidgen of dampness. Storms had been predicted by the forecast. With the exception of a faint smudge of the moon through one of the windows, the sky gave no light. We were tense. It was pitch black inside the house. I set the canister of bear mace adjacent to my pad. occasionally palming it to ensure it was still there. Each break and stir from the woods made them jerk and turning our ears to the sound. I covered my head between my knees and thought about how I could endure the hours left until morning. I was sorry to Taylor for recommending we get over here. She chuckled it off. We'd make it through and have a fantastic tale to tell. Her voice shuddered. I don't remember when I fell asleep. It was still dark when I awoke and my pillow was wet. The roof was gently encased in a light coating of rain. A small drip entered through a roof-mounted hole. I hauled my camping cot over to a dry part of the floor. Low and ominous thunder rumbled in the distance. Then something else that was nearer. A break from the backwoods, not a twig, but rather something more significant. And afterward a snarl, low and profound. I shook Taylor conscious. In the obscurity we tuned in. Nothing. I yelled it out. I couldn't, not at all. Something existed out there. Would it be advisable for us to gamble with turning on the light? No. We had to remain silent. I encircled the bear mace with both hands. The drumming on the rooftop increased. The trickle-dribble of the break in the rooftop went to a steady spill. The flimsy structure we were in was shaken by a thunderclap and a flash that lit up the sky. Had chosen to serve as our shield. The door unfurled. I let out a compulsory shout. The door swung back and forth in the stronger wind and wrapped around the wall. Fear rendered my muscles useless and I froze. I assumed Taylor was heading for the door when she made a rustling sound beside me. My hypothesis was confirmed by a second lightning bolt, the outline of Taylor bobbling in obscurity for the entryway. She utilized the short snapshot of light to accumulate her heading and hold the entryway. A subsequent glimmer followed the first, and through the entryway, a figure arose. Large and dark, it was no bear. It appeared to be stationary at the time of the light, but my imagination quickly set it in motion, dragging thanks to the open door. "Close the entryway," I hollered. A deep growl joined the thunder as Taylor slammed the door shut. Taylor screamed, "Help me!" My brain shifted in response to her voice. I hopped up and mixed advances and fell into the entryway. I pressed my shoulder against the aged, splintered wood while bracing my legs. "Did you see it?" I pressed. "Yes." What was it? I don't have the foggiest idea. Culpability overflowed my cerebrum. My intention was to travel here. I had pushed briefly summer in the mountains. Taylor could have gone to Mexico with her college friends. This outing had been, in some measure, to a limited extent, a feeling of obligation for her. The cemetery and the numerous graves, including 6 on a single day, came to mind. A strong hand caused the house to be scratched up. At least in the important details, the stories were true. Up here, something lived, something that didn't feel like sharing its home with people. My thoughts were cut off by Taylor's voice. Would it be advisable for us to run? No. Where should I run? We needed to remain together. I felt about the same size and strength as a young child as the creature pounded on the door with such force. The door slammed back into place as we pushed back. My shoulder was pinched by the timber. Using my hands, I felt a crack in the wood. The entryway wouldn't hold significantly longer. Through the deluge of downpour, the animal grunted and spat, its hot breath entering the break in the entryway and blowing over my neck. It pushed a subsequent time, and that was sufficient. We tumbled to the ground, pieces of the fragmented entryway clacking to the floor around us. I landed vigorously on my right side, the canister of bear mace spilling from my grip furthermore, rolling away into the dimness. I felt in the darkness as I crawled after it, anticipating being lifted at any moment in the air by my lower legs. Taylor screamed behind me. It held her. At long last, the edge of my pointer hit the virus steel of the canister. As I stood, I fumbled it into my hands. In the gloom, I didn't see anything. The creature snarled, the wind howled, the rain pounded on the roof, and in the middle of it all, I tracked down no compass. I arranged to fire the mace in irregular expectation and delayed a second. I set out in search of lightning's sharp fork, which would illuminate the sky. In the corner of the room, the animal was holding Taylor close to its chest. I bounced a solitary step, and as the world went dull again, I showered and trusted. The animal howled in aggravation, and Taylor crashed to the ground at my feet. Weighty strides sloshed on the grass and ground outside the house, and afterward halted. He wasn't gone at this point. I went outside into the downpour. My woolen socks were soaked through by the wet ground. Cold and heavy rain fell. The freezing wind took the glow from my body. I observed. I stood by. I felt cold. It may not have fled to the forest after the first dose, but it might have. The lightning was where? Is the windstorm over? My bicep was held by a hand. It pulled me close. The sky was lit by lightning. He was inches away from my face, eerie human-like eyes, a thick mat of dark hair doused from the downpour. I sprayed by, pushing the canister to his flat nose with my free hand. He tossed his hands up high and lifted me clear off the ground. I fell back down after feeling weightless for a while. Spongy footfalls blurred into the distance. It was no more. We crouched in the back corner of the house until dawn. The rain diminished to a drizzle and eventually stopped as the sun rose. We kicked at the broken door with our feet. Outside, a few obscure impressions squeezed into the mud, to some degree obliterated by the downpour. We began the walk home after gathering our belongings. We had been fortunate, as the cemetery's crosses demonstrated. I turned around and looked back up before we started our descent down the rock's shoulder. The incline in the misery, a solitary light beamed on the slope where the phantom town and the graveyard stood. Not a welcome light, yet an admonition. Jack Wells is my title. I'm a rough sort of fellow, the sort who's constantly favored the organization of murmuring pines to busy city streets. Scratch and Sam are something very similar, my faithful comrades, despite the fact that we divide no blood among us. It was the finish of June, the ideal time for our yearly custom, a hunting trip profound into the core of Washington State's wild. Our trio's lion-hearted jokester Nick was hunched over a Pacific Northwest map. His finger was tracing the path we would take into the forest's depths. "Jackie boy, are you ready to win the trophy for us?" With a cocky grin that split his face, he asked. Nick was charming in part because he could turn anything into a competition. In contrast, Sam was as still and mysterious as a mountain lake. He was the yin to Scratch's yang, continuously tuning in, continuously noticing, our informal aid and guru. In a way that had always been there, Sam had been born with the ability to comprehend the rhythms of nature. Interested me. I, on the other hand, was just a plain man caught between Nick's bravado and Sam's. Tranquility. I tracked down my satisfaction in the straightforwardness of our endeavors. The vibe of the earth underneath my boots, the smell of explosive and pine, the quietness that comes just when you're miles from human progress. Everything we'd brought with us, including rifles, ammunition, camping gear, was meticulously organized. Need for 7 days of hunting in the untamed wild. Nick held up a brand new hunting knife, its polished edge reflecting light. He said it with a smirk, just in case we meet a grizzly, and tucked it into his belt. The sun was beginning to set as we were packing, casting long shadows across the thick evergreen woodland encompassing our starting point. We remained there, and 3 companions limited by common regard shared chuckling and an affection for nature. The amber liquid sparkled in the waning light as we raised our beers in toast. Nick said in his voice, "To the wilderness, where men are made and legends are born," reverberating into the quiet. We drank, our anticipation of the adventure mixing with the taste of hops and barley. We awaited. We had no idea the extent to which our camaraderie and bravery would be tested. Imagined. In the event that I'd known what looked for us in the profundities of those shadowy woods, I could have turned around, could have picked the well-being and solace of the known. However, that is the nature of life. You will never know what lies around the next corner. Thus, with a sense of adventure and the crisp air reflecting the laughter of close friends, we set out into the vast wilderness, our hearts ablaze, unaware of the fact that this trip would not be like any of the previous ones. As we passed through the small town, which marked the beginning and end of civilization of wild, I felt an adjustment of the air. The traffic noise was replaced by the rustling of the leaves as the buildings gave way to trees and the A-bird's distant, unseen call. It was exactly what we came for, exactly what we cherished. The last place we went was a small supply store with equipment, canned food, and an old Native American. Behind the counter, an American man greeted us with a barely perceptible nod. His wrinkled face resembled a time map, and his eyes resembled ancient lakes, concealing more buried secrets, beyond our comprehension. "Are you headed to the forest?" he asked, his voice sounding like it was vibrating in time with the beat of the earth. "We are," Scratch answered merrily. "It is time for our yearly trophy hunt." The elderly person's look solidified. "You should regard the spirits of the woodland," he said. "This isn't simply any woodland, it's an old spot with spirits more seasoned than the stones. Give more than you take from Nick, only what you need." Nick dismissed it as part of the charm of the area and laughed it off. He slapped a few bills on the counter for our buys and turned an answer with his brand name irreverence. "Yes, old man, we'll cooperate with the spirits of the forest." The man simply gave me a head shake, and his eyes met mine. They displayed an intensity that made me feel uneasy and made the hairs on my neck stand up. There was an advance notice in his look, a supplication perhaps for us to regard his words. Inside, the air appeared to be colder, the sky grayer. Sam was silent. He had always been more sensitive to the particulars of places and people. His intuition was frequently spot on. I saw him gazing at the elderly person's shop, and the distant thoroughly search in his eyes. "Sam, what's up?" I inquired. Although he shook his head, his gaze remained thoughtful. "Did you feel that in there, Jack? Is that weight?" His meaning was clear to me. The elderly person's words reverberated to me as we pressed our new supplies into the truck. I attempted to disregard it, attempted to giggle alongside Scratch's kids about wood spirits and spooky old men, but there was a hint of unease there. The wilderness stretched out before us like an emerald sea as we drove toward the forest. And Shadow, I was unable to shake the feeling that this trip might not be as straightforward as I had anticipated. As we expected, would we be able to honor the forest spirits? The old man's words sounded like a haunting refrain, a chilling foretaste of the wilderness's heart. We wanted to win so badly. We continued driving, anticipating the unknown among the towering trees and cryptic whispers. Of the breeze, Nick and Sam, my brothers and friends, caught my eye. This was our experience, our test. Simply the woods understood what lay ahead. The experience of entering the wilderness raises one's spirit to new heights. The road became a trail, and all evidence of human activity vanished. We, our gear, and an uninhabited world that extended in every direction were the only things there. Nick exclaimed, "Home sweet home," his grin evoking the pure joy we all felt. Our camp was close to a clear stream with a constant, calming melody. The air possessed an aroma like pine, soil, and something crude, something immaculate. The loftiness of the Washington backwoods encompassed us, and we lost ourselves in its wild hug. Scratch and Sam busied themselves setting up the tents and organizing our stuff. As I walked around, identifying familiar landmarks and getting a sense of the area, the forest seemed to be breathing, as though an ancient being was silently watching us. I ignored the old man's warning when it came to my mind, blaming the vastness of my mind being tricked by the forest. Our most memorable day liquefied into the night as we assembled around a good open-air fire. The aromas of grilling meat and burning mingled as we prepared our meal. Wood. We had the impression that the trees all around us were acting as inaudible sentinels, guarding the wilderness's secrets. As the night plunged, we traded stories of past hunting endeavors, our chuckling repeating despite the silence. Scratch, ever the performer, entertained us with ridiculously overstated stories. As he shared his own amusing anecdotes, Sam listened with amused eyes. In addition, I felt at home in this small sliver of warmth and light in the vast enigmatic wilderness. As we crept into our tents, I gazed toward the night sky, the stars apparently more splendid and closer to home here in the wild. The soundtrack consisted of the rustling, hooting, distant howls and forest sounds to our fantasies. We were trackers, globe-trotters, prepared for the rush that the new day would bring. We had no idea that the forest contained more than just trails and trees. Our minds were filled with images of the hunt, and our bodies one with the way the forest moves. The wild was our home, our jungle gym, and we were prepared to find all its alcoves the corner. We were right at home, prepared for experience, totally negligent of what the backwoods was about to show. Our spirits were high and our minds were buzzing with anticipation as our journey just got underway. As I shut my eyes, the streaming stream hushing me to rest, I felt an unusual feeling of harmony, a profound association with this old land. It was only the principal day, and right now the timberland had begun to talk. We simply did not yet understand its language. The forest at dawn was a sight to behold. The principal beams of the sun painted the sky in tones of pink and orange. While the morning fog shrouded the trees in an ethereal cloak, we awakened, prepared for the exhilaration of the hunt and the strong desire to explore the wilderness. Be that as it may, as we said about our morning tasks, I really wanted to see something off. It was a slight uneasiness, similar to a rock in your shoe, sufficiently not to cause torment, however enough to catch your eye. The forest's morning noises were quieter and the air was denser, giving it a different appearance. As we wandered further into the woods, the abnormal sensation developed. The quiet was thicker, the air cooler, the shadows longer. I saw Sam's forehead wrinkle in profound idea while Scratch continued to look back behind him, an unintentional move indicating his unease. We're in good company, Sam murmured, halting to pay attention to the hints of the woods. In an effort to lighten things up, I laughed it off. There are numerous deer and possibly a few bears, so obviously we are not. Remember, that's why we're here. That evening, as we got comfortable our tents, the standard hints of the woodland were supplanted by jarring sounds. We had never seen anything like it before in the forest. It was as if it had come to life. The sound of heavy footfalls, the snap of a twig, and faint rustlings were all dangerously close, and afterward the impressions. One morning, we awakened to track down huge, unidentifiable impressions around our camp. They were a lot greater than any human or creature we was aware of, their size and design abnormal and startling. Our camp was circled by the footprints before they vanished into the thick forest. Scratch was quick to voice our aggregate anxiety. "You don't figure it very well, maybe he begun. However, the word kicked the bucket all the rage. We were all aware of what he was thinking, but it was too unbelievable and absurd. After all, we weren't the hunted. We were hunters. We weren't here to be consumed by the wilderness, we were here to conquer it. However, I was unable to continue our journey as we moved deeper into the forest's core. Shake off the inclination that we were being watched, followed, and examined. Interestingly, since we started our yearly excursions, I felt a shudder of dread wet blanket down my back. The forest had become more than just a play area. It was an adventure. It had developed into a puzzle, a mystery, and was beginning to slowly reveal its dark secrets. We were presently not simply trackers. We were intruders in a world we barely knew, players in a game we didn't understand. We were forced to pay attention because the forest was now speaking more clearly and louder. We were all, without a doubt, shaken by the discovery of the footprints. The convivial soul of our hunting trip had been supplanted with a propensity of disquiet, a sense of unease that permeated the air like an unwelcome guest. That night we lounged around the fire, its gleaming light creating long, moving, shaded areas in the dirt. The conversation of the day went to the abnormal events. The impressions, the uncommon sounds, the vibe of being watched. Nick was the first person to speak up. What do we think about it? A bear? Could be a cougar? I could see the worry lurking in his eyes as he tried to keep his tone light. In contrast, Sam was deeply contemplative. His brow was furrowed as though he were grappling with an unsolvable issue, and he had been silent all day. "I don't believe it's a bear or a cougar," he at long last said, his voice low and weighty. "Yet, what else might it at any point be?" I asked, expecting to carry a reasonableness to our developing feelings of trepidation. Possibly a joke pulled by other campers. A joke? In no place? Far-fetched, Sam answered, shaking his head. He investigated the fire, somewhere out in dreamland, then at long last voiced the unspeakable. "Have you all always known about the Yeti? The Bigfoot?" The night's stillness was broken only by Nick's forceful laughter. "You must be joking, Sam. Bigfoot? That is only a legend, a fanciful story." But Sam meant it. He recapped stories he had heard, nearby legends and stories of experiences with the tricky animal. Although the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, it sounded crazy. The bizarre impressions, the creepy sounds, the puzzling sensation of being watched. I just couldn't take it. "Sam, those are just stories, folklore. We won't leave our excursion due to some old spouse's story." Sam shook his head. "It's actually not necessary to focus on leaving the excursion, Jack. It all boils down to comprehending the situation at hand. We should watch out. We're in good company in these woods." As I lay in my tent that night, I couldn't help but wonder about everything we had gone through. So far, did our minds just play tricks on us? Or were we truly in the midst of a mystery that defied our comprehension? The hints of the woodland were done soothing. They held a note of hazard, an advance notice maybe. Our hearts were home to fear, and its icy fingers were slowly clinging to us. As I floated off to rest, one idea orbited to me. We had to make a choice while we were in the middle of a mystery at the edge of an unknown frontier. To make a way to pick. Much to our dismay, the decision had previously been made as far as we're concerned. The air was still heavy with a sense of unease when we awoke the following morning. Breakfast was a calm undertaking, our discussions quieted and constrained. The woodland as well appeared to partake in our restlessness. An odd silence replaced the usual morning chorus. We chose to proceed with our investigation. The excitement of the hunt was now tinged with dread. We entered the heart of the forest, where the shadows and towering trees served as a watchtower. Holding on to insider facts, our hearts raced with every twig snap and rustle. It occurred just a few hours into the day. We stopped dead in our tracks when we heard a rustle in the nearby bushes. I tried to see what was moving among the foliage by squinting. Then at that point it ventured out into the clearing and my breath hitched in my throat, standing tall and with large shoulders and piercing eyes covered in hair. It wasn't a cougar or bear. It was no creature we had at any point experienced. It saw us, its look consistent, surveying, smart. I was overcome by a primal, paralyzing fear that pinned me in place. The animal took a gander at us for seemingly an unending length of time, then transformed and disappeared into shocking speed through the forest. After that, there was a deafening silence. We were still frozen and unable to comprehend what we had just seen as we stood there. It was Sam who at last ended the quiet. His voice was shaky, but his eyes were bright and filled with an odd mixture of fascination and fear. "It's genuine. Bigfoot exists." Scratch said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes wide in shock. His usual bravado was absent as he looked at Sam and then at me. His expression of fear mirrored mine, and I could see it. The remainder of the day was a haze. Our senses were sharpened and our hearts were pounding as we walked through the forest in a day. A primal instinct to survive had taken the place of the excitement of the hunt, to get out of the unknown. As we got back to the camp, I really wanted to think about the day's occasions. As thrill seekers and hunters, we had entered the forest. However, at this point, we were the ones being stalked by a mythical creature. The sounds of the forest took on a new, terrifying meaning as I lay in my tent that night. We were in the Bigfoot's territory, the wilderness's ruler. We had needed an undertaking, a story to tell, and we had tracked down it in the core of the Washington forest in the form of a fascinating and terrifying creature. The woods had uncovered its confidential, and we were left with a decision to battle or to escape. Yet, as the sound of weighty footfalls reverberated somewhere far off, I realized that the choice was no longer any of our concern. The actual adventure had only just begun. The fear and uncertainty that had taken hold did not go away with the new day. Hold on to us. The woodland was as of now not the tranquil wild we had respected. It was now a living thing with danger and mystery surrounding it. There was no denying that we were in the Bigfoot realm. The morning was spent in serious conversations. The inquiry was as of now not about the presence of the Bigfoot. We had seen it, encountered its presence. The inquiry currently was, what were we going to do about it? Nick was the first to express the terror that overtook us. We want to leave. We are ill-equipped to deal with this. He signaled towards the wild around us, his face colorless. However, Sam disagreed. We came here for an undertaking, isn't that right? Furthermore, presently we have it. We've found something unimaginable. We can't simply turn our backs and run. Be that as it may, imagine a scenario where it's perilous. Scratch contended. What if it strikes? I couldn't decide between the two. Nick was accurate. We weren't scientists or researchers, we were hunters. We had no clue about how to manage what is happening, how to deal with an experience with a Bigfoot. However, Sam was correct. We had discovered something amazing that very few people had seen before. It presented a chance to investigate the unknown. The discussion continued throughout the day without reaching a consensus. The apprehension was substantial, yet so was the interest. The Bigfoot had tossed our excursion into turmoil, flipped around our reality. However, it had also provided us with an extraordinary adventure, story, and discovery. We ultimately decided to remain, at least for some time. We consented to maintain a protected separation, to notice and learn, however not in sight. The woodland was the Bigfoot's region, and we were the interlopers. It was crucial for regard that, to grasp our place in this wild. That evening we alternated keeping watch, our ears tuned to the hints of the timberland. Each stir, each far-off yell sent a chill down our spines, yet not entirely settled to remain. We were as of now not only trackers out traveling, we were pioneers on a mission, confronted with a mystery that terrified and exhilarated at the same time. As I sat by the withering coals of our fire, the moon creating long shaded areas on the backwoods floor, an odd sense of anticipation filled me. The experience with the Bigfoot had made a huge difference. It had changed our outing into an undertaking that could only be described as epic. However, it had also signaled the beginning of a conflict between our anxiety and curiosity. We were gazing into an unknown abyss from the edge of the known world. In addition, there was no going back. Our days in the forest took on a new rhythm that was not driven by the excitement of the hunt, but rather by the anticipation of the unexplored world. We moved slowly, keeping our eyes and ears open, and our hearts beat with a mixture of fear and excitement. Also, expectation. The Bigfoot made its presence felt in the unusual rustlings of the underbrush, the huge footprints that appeared out of nowhere, and an eerie sense that someone was watching that never left us. However, it kept its separation, a shadowy figure that appeared to float on the edges of our perception, a mystery that pushed us to face our doubts and fears. We had our second encounter one afternoon as we cautiously navigated the dense forest. I saw it initial, a huge figure sneaking in the shadows. It was tall and staring intently into my eyes. There was a brief moment of silence that seemed to last indefinitely. It then began to move. The Bigfoot ventured into the clearing, its development smooth and quick. It took a gander at us, not with hostility or dread, but rather with what I could depict as interest. Respect was due to the creature's quiet power and primal strength. It lifted its hand as though recognizing our presence. I was shocked, uncertain of how to answer. I lifted my hand consequently, a basic motion that held such a lot of importance at that time. The encounter had a strange serenity and a surreal sense of connection. Despite the fact that we were intruders into its world, it had decided to acknowledge and accept our presence. The species silently came to an understanding at that point. The Bigfoot maintained eye contact with us briefly longer, then, at that point, transformed and vanished into the woodland, leaving us in stunningness of the experience. The woodland appeared to inhale around us, the leaves murmuring accounts of their quiet watcher. Around evening time, as we accumulated around the fire, our discussion was loaded up with amazement and speculation. We described the experience, each detail scratched into our recollections, every second a confirmation to the absurd situation we were in. Sam said, looking far away into the fire, "We're a part of something bigger than us." Expression. "We're observers to a mysterious this timberland has held close for a really long time." Scratch gestured, his trepidation supplanted by a newly discovered feeling of regard. "We're not simply trackers or wayfarers. We're students, understanding a world we won't ever be aware existed." That night, as the sounds of the forest lulled me to sleep in my tent, I realized how significantly our journey had altered us. We had come to the forest in search of excitement and adventure as hunters. We had seen as considerably more. We had discovered the Bigfoot's eyes in the middle of the Washington wilderness, a fact about ourselves and our surroundings. We were a part of a larger life story, a web of connections that reached further our cognizance. Our experience had transformed into an excursion of revelation. Of the Bigfoot, however, of our own boldness and interest. We were as of now not simply trackers. The forest was telling a story about respect and understanding, and we were a part of it. What's more, concurrence, and the story was nowhere near finished. Our time in the forest settled into a pattern, a rhythm set by the mysterious being we now recognized as our mute companion. We proceeded with our perceptions, cautious not to barge in or incite to regard the limit among us and the Bigfoot. However, our unspoken agreement was broken one fateful day. We had wandered further into the woods, exploring through the thick underbrush. As we couldn't ignore a chilling growl that was deep and resonant, we heard it. Rising up out of the foliage, we saw it, a subsequent Bigfoot. It was bigger, seriously scary. Eyes sparkling with a wild force sent a shock of dread through us. As a clear sign of aggression and a message intended to discourage, it bared its teeth. Before we could respond, the first Bigfoot we had been noticing showed up. It situated itself among us and the forceful animal, its nonverbal communication mirroring a bizarre feeling of defense. A quiet showdown followed, the two Bigfoot estimating each other up. The aggressive Bigfoot lunged suddenly, and our tranquil observation was disrupted. Into a scene from a nature narrative, the battle was serious, a presentation of force and strength that left us in wonderment. The attacker was repelled by the protective Bigfoot, who used its size and strength to drive it into the wilderness once more. When the forceful Bigfoot was gone, our defender turned towards us. Before it, too, vanished into the forest, it stood there for a brief moment with its eye fixed on us. Each of us reflected on the unforeseen occurrences as we silently returned to our camp. A new facet of the Bigfoot, a society, a hierarchy, and a territorial system had emerged from the encounter, debate we hadn't expected. As we sat around the fire that night, we realized how complicated the situation was. We were not merely observing a creature, rather we were entering a culture and society that was, however intriguing as it might have been, overwhelming. Our presence here, *IT*S, causing unsettling influences, Scratch said, voicing the worry that had been perplexing us. Sam agreed that we need to be more careful. We are in their world as guests. We want to recollect that. As I lay in my tent, my psyche replayed the day's occasions. Our experience had taken a perilous turn, our function as observers jeopardizing this unexplored society's equilibrium. The Bigfoot had safeguarded us, yet it had likewise served us an unmistakable message. We were stepping on fragile grounds. The repercussions of our intrusion now outweighed the excitement of our discovery. We had started out as hunters, changed into watchers, and now we were unwanted visitors. We had an obligation to respect the forest and not to violate its secrets. Carefully in this unexplored area. Our process was at this point not about rush or disclosure. Respect and understanding were at stake. We were obligated to respect the Bigfoot because it had given us its secret. I made a secret promise as the forest's sounds lulled me to sleep. We would be cautious, humble in our learning, and deeply respectful. The experience was not even close to finished, yet entirely our viewpoint had perpetually changed. Our interactions with the forest and its elusive inhabitants in the days that followed took on another dynamic. We kept our explorations to a minimum and kept a respectful distance from the places that were frequently through the Bigfoot. Even though we were only temporarily a part of this ecosystem, we were determined to do no harm. In spite of the safety measures, we had another experience. This time, a group of Bigfoots, including the one who had shielded us, were the culprits. Their eyes were filled with a curious intelligence as they watched us from a distance. The two of them silently acknowledged one another's presence during the peaceful encounter. Our resolve was strengthened by the experience. We were gatecrashers indeed, however, we were additionally students. We had encountered a legend, an animal whose presence had been bantered for quite a long time. We had an obligation to record our experience, to impart it to the world, however, in a way that did not put these creatures or their environment in danger. We began compiling our observations by sketching, taking notes, and making sure that every detail of our collaborations with the Bigfoot. The nights were spent around the fire discussing theories and exchanging ideas and insights, as well as rumors. Unexpectedly, our hunting trip had turned into a research trip, which was as invigorating as it was lowering. I became more and more in tune with the forest and its inhabitants as the days passed. The Bigfoots have a sense of community and quiet strength and intelligence. Their reasonable connection to their house were something beyond slippery animals of legends. They were a demonstration of the rich embroidery of life on the planet, an obvious indication of our job as stewards of this planet. As our last days in the woodland drew nearer, we realized we had a difficult undertaking ahead. We needed to tell a story and reveal a truth, but it had to be done right. The world had the right to be familiar with the Bigfoot, yet the Bigfoot likewise had the right to live in harmony, away from the inquisitive eyes and expected dangers of humanity. Our last night in the backwoods was loaded up with a weird feeling of despairing. The flickering flames cast long shadows on us as we sat around the fire, lost in our thoughts. The woodland floor. We had set out into the wild in search of an adventure, but we had discovered so much more. A secret world, a profound comprehension, and an unexpected obligation. As I lay in my tent, the hints of the woodland quieting me to rest once and for all. I couldn't resist the opportunity to feel thankful. We were trusted with its secrets by the forest, which welcomed us into its fold. The Bigfoot, with its quiet insight, had shown us more about regard and conjunction than anyone could have done it. Our spirits were uplifted, but our hearts were heavy as we got ready to leave the forest. We realized we were abandoning a piece of ourselves. However, we were also bringing something else with us. A story, a truth, a promise to safeguard respect. Remembering, sharing, being cautious, and learning with humility are all important. And most importantly, a promise to keep in mind that we were not merely invaders, observers, or hunters. We were a part of this amazing life tapestry, and it was our duty to honor it. We weren't prepared for how hard it was to leave the forest. We pressed our stuff in quietness, each assimilated in our own considerations. The wild that had at first appeared to be overwhelming and wild had turned into a soothing presence. Its inhabitants coexist in silence. As we made our last checks, guaranteeing that we left no hint of our visit, a peaceful stirring grabbed our eye. The Bigfoot that had first shown us this secret world stood looking out over the foliage. At the edge of our camp, our looks met, a quiet goodbye passing between us. We had entered its world, brought about change and chaos, but also learned. We were departing with a deeper comprehension of its culture and way of life because we had witnessed them, of ourselves and our place in the world. The Bigfoot turned and fled into the woods, giving one last lingering glance before disappearing. The dense undergrowth and towering trees, it felt like both an end and a beginning, a promise of understanding, coexistence, and respect. The climb back hushed up, our psyches caught up with handling our unprecedented experience. The woods, presently recognizable and consoling, appeared to murmur its goodbye. We had learned that the rustling leaves, chirping birds, and distant howls were a symphony of sounds to comprehend and appreciate. Back at the vehicle, we stacked our stuff, the unmistakable confirmation of our experience. However, the actual treasure, the real proof, was not tangible. It was to us, our hearts, a piece of us that we would convey any place we went. Stories, theories, and plans filled the drive back. How might we share our revelation? How could we guarantee the Bigfoot's peace and safety? What would this entail for the world and for us? Scratch ever the practical person framed an arrangement. We must approach this with caution. Yes, we have evidence, but we also have a duty. We can't allow our revelation to jeopardize them. Sam gestured, his eyes loaded up with a decided determination. We have the power to alter the narrative, influence how the world views and interacts with creatures. We get an opportunity to have a genuine effect. We had changed a lot, I realized, as the familiar cityscape emerged. We had come into the forest as hunters in search of excitement and adventure. We were returning as advocates, secret world ambassadors, and custodians of an amazing truth. The sounds of the city were a stark contrast to the peaceful ambience of my house that night. Orchestra of the forest. I ended up missing the wild. I was missing the feeling of connection, the excitement of discovery, and the experience of being humbled. A little piece of a bigger entirety. However, I was aware that our decision was correct. We were required to keep a secret because we had been given it. Even though our adventure in the Washington forest had come to an end, our journey had only just begun. We weren't just buddies on a hunting trip anymore. We were a team on a mission to tell a story, alter a story, and make sure the safeguard of a creature that had been hidden for an excessive amount of time. Although the Bigfoot sighting marked the beginning of our story, it was far from over. We were prepared for the upcoming real challenge. It was a whirlwind of activity following our return. We meticulously prepared our evidence, consulted with experts, and compiled it. Narrative. Our hunting trip had turned into a peculiarity, and we were on the incline of imparting it to the globe. When we made the announcement that we had found something, the news was filled with rumors and theories. We confronted doubters, devotees, and those energetic for sentimentality. Waiting to hear our story, the entire world was on the edge of its seat. Thus, we recounted our story. The excitement of the hunt turned into an unexpected adventure as we shared our experiences. We uncovered our proof, the photos and recordings that validated our cases. We demonstrated to them the world we had discovered, which included a flourishing secret society deep within the Washington wild. The responses were changed and extreme: fervor, incredulity, interest, dread. There was no going back now that the Pandora's box had been opened. We remained steadfast despite the chaos. We emphasized our obligation to preserve and respect these creatures as part of our responsibility to learn from them without putting them in harm's way. We found ourselves in a strange position as the dust settled. We were the ministers of the Bigfoot, a connection between two universes. We had developed into advocates, using our platform to educate and influence others and to inspire responsible behavior and reverence for these amazing animals. The Bigfoot legend had become a fact, and the world was aware of it. However, our story was still not over. Despite the fact that we had opened a new chapter in our understanding of humans, the story was still being written. We had a long road ahead of us with both opportunities and difficulties. I occasionally find myself back in the wilderness of Washington, standing at the edge of the recognizable forest. A siren song of memories and lessons. The forest calls to me as a reminder of the amazing adventure that made a difference in our lives. I consider the Bigfoot a quiet eyewitness in its reality, an image of solidarity, knowledge, and intrigue. I consider the lessons it imparted to us, the truth it revealed, and the responsibility it placed on us. Us using. Our process started as a chase, looking for rush and experience. It came to an end with a profound comprehension of our world and a bond with a mysterious creature, a promise to honor and safeguard, as well as a larger-than-us mission. As I stand there, the hints of the woodland encompassing me, I can't resist the urge to feel a sense of appreciation. We had wandered into the obscure and arisen with something other than a story. A truth about ourselves, our world, and our place in it had been revealed to us. Our story started with a locating, an outright exhilarating experience that transformed us. However, it did not end there. It evolved into a mission, a trip, and an ongoing narrative that would keep growing and inspiring others. The wind rustles through the leaves, the forest whispers its secrets, and somewhere deep I am aware that the Bigfoot continues to exist at its core as a world guardian and symbol of our commitment. Although our journey had just begun, our adventure had come to an end. We were the Bigfoot's narrators and guardians, and the story of the Bigfoot was far from over. Our story had begun with a chase. However, it had become quite a lot more. We were living the unfinished story of respect, understanding, and coexistence, ready to tell it in more detail. You wouldn't be aware of the resoluteness of the city's concrete maze if you'd never left it. Wild calls. It murmurs in the stir of flyers flaunting trails flanked by transcending trees, reverberations in online surveys of an appealing, immaculate world, and thunders in the quiet of star-strewn nights. It was this call that had prodded my significant other, Sarah, a brave scholar with an interest for everything wild, to persuade me, a mild-mannered educator who values comfort, to trade our comfortable loft for a tent under the boundless skies of the Mount Pastry Specialist Snow National Forest of Kwame. From the second we chose, Sarah resembled a lady had. Maps spread across our kitchen table, converging with agendas of gear, food supplies, and medical supplies. My worries were submerged in the sea of her enthusiasm as I was swept up in her enthusiasm. After all, how often do you get a chance to take a deep breath and ignore the city's noise? The peace and quiet of unspoiled nature? The weeks going before the outing were a whirlwind of arrangements. I went back every evening after school to find a new camping tool or a book about the wilderness. Survival brought to our door. We braved the strange-tasting dehydration and learned how to set up our new tent in the living room. Meals. And Sarah tried, God bless her, to teach me how to read a compass. My little misfortune with the north and south needles before long turned into a running joke between us. I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, even though I shared Sarah's excitement. The wild, for all its excellence, is as yet an unfamiliar world to a city inhabitant like I am. I saw an opportunity for Sarah to immerse herself in the unadulterated grandeur of nature, while Sarah saw a world without any trace of my day-to-day comforts. A hot shower, an agreeable bed, a cafe around the bend. However, Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious because it was so innocent and childlike. Prevented me from denying her this. I recollect the prior night we left. Half-packed backpacks and camping gear littered our apartment when I noticed I was attempting to fit an additional pair of socks into my already stuffed pack. Sarah. She remained by the window, washed in the delicate shine of the city lights, gazing into the immensity of the sky at night. The wilderness we were about to enter was reflected in her eyes, just wild, beautiful, and a little bit scary at the same time. I yelled to Sarah, "Sarah, are you afraid?" She smiled softly as she turned around. She responded, "No, David, I'm just excited. This will be an experience." So we got ready to answer the call with equal parts fear and excitement of nature. We had no idea at the time that it was an invitation to an adventure that would alter our lives forever. Our days. The city was all the while awakening, scouring rest from its eyes as Sarah and I got away into the first light. As we sped up our approach to the embrace of the colors of the world beyond our city limits were a blur. The wild, Mount Breadcook's Snoqualmie public woods uncovered itself steadily, similar to a showstopper bashful of its splendor. Its limit appeared to be erratic, the trees developing denser, the air fresher, and the hints of city life blurring into a quieted quiet that was just hindered by the calls of birds and the occasional leaf rustling. Sarah's eyes shimmered with undisguised fervor, her hand fixing around mine, a quiet commitment of shared experience. We chose the most suitable location for our camp next to a clear brook and surrounded by a thick copse of trees and shielded by a rough outcrop. I gathered wood for our campfire while Sarah worked on the tent. In the wild, the routine manual labor that we do in the city took on a new significance, amplifying our ties to the natural world. We decided to go out and explore after setting up camp. We wandered into the forest with no real destination in mind. The moss-coated trunks, the symphony of unseen creatures, and the overwhelming sense of being enveloped in a world untouched by human hands. It was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Sarah walked ahead, her biologist eyes taking in everything, stopping every now and then to point out a unique plant species or animal tracks. As the sun began its descent, we returned to our campsite. I tended to the fire while Sarah prepared our meal. The flames danced against the encroaching darkness, casting long, exaggerated shadows on our tent. I remember thinking how small we seemed against the vastness of the wilderness. A fleeting thought chased away by Sarah's infectious laughter echoing into the night. But amid the joy there was something else, a strange feeling I couldn't quite shake. The forest, while beautiful, was also alien, almost eerie in its serenity. As darkness wrapped the world around us in its blanket, I felt an unease creeping in. I shrugged it off, attributing it to being my first night in the wild. "We are just visitors here, David," Sarah said, as if sensing my unease. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "We have to respect the rules of the wild." I nodded, lost in thought, staring into the flames, the shadows dancing around us growing taller. The wilderness in all its grandeur felt intimidating. The unfamiliar sounds of the forest seemed louder, the darkness denser. Yet next to me was Sarah, her face illuminated by the firelight, humming a gentle melody that weaved through the night, harmonizing with the chorus of the wild. I looked at her, this woman who loved nature with all her heart and felt a sense of calm. As we crawled into our tent, the forest humming its lullaby, I realized that the wilderness was not just a place on the map. It was an entity, alive and breathing, beautiful and daunting. It was a world we were only beginning to understand, a world that held secrets beneath its canopy, secrets we were yet to uncover. Little did we know then that some secrets are better left undiscovered. We woke to a symphony of bird song and a day that dawned bright and promising. We eased into the morning with a simple breakfast and a steaming cup of coffee. It wasn't the gourmet brew from the corner cafe back home, but something about the crisp air and the peaceful surroundings lent it a unique flavor that I had never tasted before. Post-breakfast, as we planned our day, Sarah pointed out something strange. Around our campsite were large footprints, far bigger than any human or animal we knew. They dotted the soft earth leading to and away from our camp, a disturbing narration of a nocturnal visitor. My first thought was a bear, but Sarah, crouched beside one of the prints with a puzzled frown, disagreed. She described the peculiar features, including the form and number of toes. It matched no creature she could imagine. Her researcher mind got going, and she carefully shot and estimated the prints, her underlying amazement changing into logical interest. Our depleted food supply added more pieces to the puzzle. We were missing a bag of fruits that we had hung on a tree branch. The twine we had used to get it hung unfilled, torn and frayed. While I was unable to stifle my rising worry, Sarah excused it as normal events in nature. She proposed it very well, maybe crafted by a creature drawn to the smell of our food. I wanted to believe her and dismiss my fear as urban paranoia, but something stopped me. Seemed off. Regardless of the agitating revelation, we chose to adhere to our arrangement. We hiked all day, taking in the vastness of the older forest and its grandeur, reminder of our smallness. The transcending trees stood like quiet sentinels, their mysteries murmuring through the stirring leaves. The morning's unease lingered in the back of my mind, but the light seemed to stay, the apprehension under control. The forest was a riot of color as we made our way back to our camp at dusk. The sky was colored red and orange as the sun set. The occurrences of the morning were reduced to merely anecdotes as we prepared dinner around the campfire of our wild experience. Yet, as night covered the woodland, the quiet appeared to be more profound, the haziness denser. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched, the large footprints and the food that was missing. My worries. I investigated at Sarah, wanting to track down consolation in her simple certainty. I detected a glimmer of doubt beneath her composed demeanor. Her jovial banter was replaced by a reflective gaze as she looked into the gloom beyond the fire. Silence. In the well-being of our tent, I gripped to the consoling sound of Sarah's consistent relaxing. Be that as it may, rest evaded me, the quiet of the wild broken by new sounds. Each stir, each far-off call appeared to be amplified, my creative mind conjuring up pictures of enormous shadowy figures. Around evening time, the wild felt somewhat less inviting, its secrets somewhat less captivating. A feeling of dread that transcended my urban upbringing lurked beneath the splendor. It was a vague threat. Fears. I couldn't help but wonder if we were the watchers as I eventually fell into an uneasy sleep, or on the other hand, the watched. We awoke to a world that appeared deceptively normal as the new day began. The sun rose, projecting long, lively dashes of orange and pink across the sky. The chatter of forest creatures and the rustle of the leaves stirred the forest. Maybe the feeling of dread toward the earlier night had broken down with the morning dew. Notwithstanding, our tranquility was brief. As haziness fell that day, the woods changed. Although the change was almost invisible, there was a shift in the air, and a growing every whispering breeze and rustling leaf seemed to be filled with tension. The quietness was heavier, the obscurity more significant. Our laughter was dampened by an instinctive response to the unknown, and our conversations turned to mumbles. We were unable to explain or ignore the dread that the night brought. Then it began, a low, throaty sound reverberating through the trees. At first it was far off, an unsettling at this point dynamic threat, but it seemed to get closer and more distinct with each minute. The sound was not normal for anything we had heard. It wasn't the howl of an owl or wolf. Rather, it was something far more primitive and chilling. Sarah, her face an image of fixation, was attempting to recognize the source. Her broad information on natural life appeared to miss the mark. We felt cold shivers run down her spines as the calls continued, her brows furrowing in confusion. We ought to remain inside the tent, she proposed, her voice lower than expected, bound with an anxiety she had never shown. However much I had wished to just track down solace in her logical demeanor, her words exacerbated my fears. There was something out there that didn't fit our concept of the wild. Inside the security of our tent, we crouched together. The nylon walls appeared to be paper flimsy against the inauspicious tune of the wild. The eerie silence was even more unsettling as the distant calls continued. Each sound, each delay appeared to take care of our minds, the truth of our segregation becoming a dark entity that could be felt. As we listened, caught between the desire to and fear, the line between the two became blurry, the urge to run away and the desire to learn the truth. We stuck to one another, finding comfort in our common fear. Our eyes completely open in the haziness, our ears sensitive to the unpleasant song of nature. Our trepidation grew as the night got darker, a chilling reminder that the voices in the dark were now a regular part of our nights of our position within the larger scheme of things. They were the unseen creatures of the night, and we were intruders in their world. We had ventured into their domain, heard their calls, and felt their presence. I recollect Sarah's words from that evening, murmured in the dead quietness, "David, we're not the only one." It wasn't a revelation at all. Rather, it was the confirmation of an increasing fear of the unknown, of the voices in obscurity, of the eyes that may watch, of the animal that left its tracks all over our camp. The forest lost some of its charm that night. It changed from a universe of experience to a domain of the unexplored world. The calls went on until the primary light of sunrise, an inauspicious song that held us hostage, restricting us in an expectant quiet. One thing became clear as we listened while lying awake. Our idyllic escape was about to take a dark turn, our experience developing into a dreamlike, disrupting venture. The following days were strangely fraught with fascination and unease. We awoke each morning hoping that the inexplicable events of the previous night were just figments of our overly imaginative thinking. Be that as it may, each night the proof of the secret hiding in the wild showed in some manner. The impressions returned, circumnavigating our campground, everyone bigger and more profound than previously. We woke up one morning to a heap of our belongings, including water bottles, a backpack, and even our portable oven, stacked perfectly outside our tent, as though organized by a concealed guest. Every night, the strange guttural calls continued, getting closer and more resonant. We began to see more modest signs, twigs and leaves organized in designs excessively conscious to be a mishap, half-eaten natural products set close to our tent, and a curious musky smell that appeared to hang heavily above our camp. What startled us the most was the uncanny sensation of being watched. It appeared as though unseen eyes were continuously observing our movements, a mute observer biding its time to spend it in the tree's shadows. Our giggling darkened, our discussions became quieted murmurs, and a fundamental strain crept into our relationship, and our responses were like how the forest had changed in an eerie way. Around us, I experienced a strange sensation one evening while gathering firewood. A shiver ran down my spine as the back of my neck's hair stood up in response. My heart was pounding as I turned around and looked into the thicket. Although I didn't notice anything unusual, I felt more like I was being watched, more than ever before. With fleeting glances over my shoulder, I dashed back to the camp, the silence of the backwoods enhancing my feeling of fear. Sarah's eyes mirrored my fears as she observed my anxiety. The standard soothing words were lost on us, the two of us mindful that something was amiss. We huddled together that night, unable to fall asleep, our ears stressed for any sound that wasn't essential for the normal corral of nature. Our adrenaline surged with every rustle and snap of the twig. The eerie soundscape of the wilderness was punctuated by the calls, which echoed around us and increased in intensity, by an unfavorable quiet. I whispered to Sarah, barely audible in the ominous silence, "What is taking place, David?" she admitted in a trembling voice. "I don't know. I'm not sure." I felt a chilling wave of icy dread as I heard her voice echo with fear. Sarah, the one who had bravely wandered into the core of the wild, the lady whose comprehension of the wild was unmatched, was apprehensive. The stark reality hit us as we sat there in the pitch blackness. We were helpless before a concealed element, an animal of the evening, whose goals we proved unable to comprehend. We were no longer the carefree explorers who took in the wilderness's beauty. We had turned into the gatecrashers in a world that didn't have a place with us. The terrifying game of hide-and-seek had transformed into our adventure, and the stakes were now higher than we had at any point envisioned. We were trapped in a story outside of our reach, caught in a wild that was gradually uncovering its darker side, and our growing uncertainty was the only thing certain. The silence on the 6th day was oppressive and unsettling. The birds' chirping appeared muffled, and the sunlight struggled to break through the thick foliage. It seemed dull, and the timberland felt less welcoming, really premonition. Sarah and I chose to utilize the sunshine to track down replies. We began our exploration by following the strange footprints with a shared apprehension. That drove away from our campground. In spite of its dense beauty, the forest kept its secrets well hidden. We felt more isolated the further we went, the quiet of the wild practically stunning. The impressions drove us to a little clearing, the thick trees giving way to a fix of open sky. In the clearing, a sight looked for us that creeped us out. A massive heap of piled-up branches and leaves that looked like a primitive shelter. Fruits and the remains of small animals littered the ground around the shelter. The musky scent that we had become used to, more grounded than at any other time. It was abundantly clear that this was the residence of our unseen guest. Sarah moved toward the design warily, her researcher senses abrogating her apprehension. She looked at the temporary shelter and noticed how strong it was to bend and break, the branches utilized in its development. This was built by an intelligent and sturdy entity. She followed off, looking around anxiously. We documented our findings for the entire day. We took photos, gathered examples, and examined speculations. The impressions, the sounds, the safe house. Everything pointed towards a substance that was a creature, yet something more subtle, more mind-boggling. However, we were unable to shake off a chewing dread that we were managing something a long ways past our grasping, something that challenged clarification. The bits of the riddle fit into no known picture, the truth of our circumstance turning out to be more dreamlike constantly. We had a disturbing thought as we returned to the camp. We had found the nook of the animal, yet where could the actual animal have been? We felt uneasy in the pit of our stomachs. We hurried our means, the shadows of the trees protracting around us, the wild coming close. The once bright colors of twilight returned to us when we returned to our camp just as the sun was setting. Now they appeared drab and gloomy. The strange calls began earlier that evening and continued to echo around us, almost as if they were responding. In response to our entry into the creature's den, our tent's thin walls felt more vulnerable than ever that night. In the pitch blackness, every leaf rustle and gust of wind seemed magnified. We waited for the unavoidable as we lay wide awake with our senses heightened. Our discovery had not brought relief, but rather increased anxiety and a greater comprehension of the riddle we were managing. We clung to one another as the darkness got darker, finding solace in our shared fear. Our campaign had taken us to the core of a secret that was gradually transforming into a bad dream. We were stranded in the wilderness together with a fascinating and terrifying being, our fascination morphing into a terror that gnawed at our mental faculties. We weren't just two people out camping anymore. We were caught in the middle of a terrifying encounter and facing the unknown, our endurance in limbo. On the 7th day, our feelings of trepidation took a substantial structure. Surprisingly quiet had been the day. Our camp was not encircled by any tracks. The pungent musky odor had not permeated the air and no objects had been moved. This uncanny quiet placed us further nervous, the expectation of an experience weighing vigorously on our minds. As the murkiness of the night came in, so did the recognizable sounds. The crackling, rustling, and guttural calls that could be heard in the trees of twigs. They were closer than ever tonight, and each echoing sound broke our hearts. To slur a note, unexpectedly there was a stir close to our camp, trailed by a low snarl that appeared to vibrate the very air around us. Sarah and I froze, our eyes wide with fear as we checked the infringing obscurity. A large, imposing figure stood at the campsite's edge when the shadows emerged. Its form stood out against the dim moonlight, partially obscured by the trees' outlines. The animal was gigantic, its height and mass dissimilar to anything we had at any point seen. It strolled on two legs, its stance marginally stooped, the wide shoulders and long arms adding to its scary presence. As we stared at the creature, our minds struggled to process. Time seemed to stand still. What we were seeing. Despite the darkness, the creature's ominous-looking eyes gave the impression that it was also paying attention to us. It did not look aggressive, but rather curious and almost intelligent. We were overcome by a primal raw fear, a deep-seated dread that sent our adrenaline pumping through our veins. However, there was also an odd sense of awe. We were now confronted with a mythical being that existed at the edge of human comprehension. We and the creature remained motionless for what seemed like an interminable period. We were caught in a fight with an unknown being and were frozen in this instant. Then, leisurely, the animal transformed and withdrew into the shadows, vanishing as quietly as we were shaken to our core and gasping for air when it appeared. The remainder of the night was a haze of dread and doubt. We clustered inside our tent, too reluctant to even think about venturing out, our brains wrestling with the truth of our meeting. It appeared as though the creature's return was presaged by every sound outside and whisper of the wind, keeping us on a blade edge of dread. We emerged from the tent at dawn, the scars of our terror still visible in the chilly morning air. The morning sun shone brightly on the trees, and the forest seemed oblivious to our predicament. Birds peeping in ecstatic obliviousness of our startling experience. More questions than answers remained for us. What was this animal? What was it doing to us? Was it meant to harm us? One thing was clear. We had encountered an unfathomable entity, an enigma that straddled the distinction between human comprehension and myth. A profound sense of awe took its place as the fear slowly faded away. No longer were we merely observers. We were now a part of a tale as old as the wilderness itself. The wilderness became even more terrifying following the encounter. It appeared as though every shadow, every tree, and every leaf was conspiring against us. The forest's once vibrant beauty was now clouded by a sense of impending doom. We went through the day in a condition of anxious strain, the earlier night's experience replaying in our thoughts we knew we had because our food supplies were decreasing and our mental health was constantly threatened by fear. To go with a choice, we could get together and leave, attempt to advance back to human progress. Before we could remain, attempt to comprehend the animal that had transformed our experience into an endurance challenge. Fear and fascination clouded our judgment as we considered our options for hours. The realization that we were witnessing something extraordinary tipped the scales in our favor. Something that was only known to a select few. We had unintentionally discovered a mystery that begged to be solved. We chose to remain. We spent the following several days endeavoring to lay out a line of correspondence with the creature. When we heard it, we made non-threatening gestures and left fruit at the camp's perimeter, close by, and attempted to impersonate the sounds it made. Despite our best efforts, the shadows silently observed. Consistently, the animal visited our camp, its monstrous structure sneaking at the edge of the light. Unsettlingly, it appeared to be studying us and observing our actions with keen intelligence. It never attacked us or responded to our attempts to communicate with it. It merely listened. Rest was ancient history. Our hearts raced at the sound and rustle of each object. The animal's presence cast a long, frightening shadow over our reality, turning our experience into a waking bad dream. In spite of the trepidation, there was a hesitant regard for the animal. It had not shown any signs of aggression or malicious intent. It seemed just as interested in us as we were in it. Our bravery was tested during the nights. The current endeavor is a desperate attempt to coexist with the creature. We were living like there's no tomorrow, got between the base anxiety toward the obscure and the logical. Our motivation was curiosity. We were constantly reminded of how insignificant we were in comparison to the vastness of nature. We were gatecrashers in the animal's reality, and it was permitting us to remain. It appeared that the creature's acceptance of our presence was crucial to our lives. We had made the creature our home in the forest, with all its beauty and danger, our home. Excluded visitor. Our existence was ruled by a being that defied comprehension, and our lives had taken a surreal turn. We were living in the creature's shadow, which was just as terrifying as it was fascinating. We were unable to shake a peculiar sensation as we prepared for yet another night of anxious anticipation. Feeling. We were living a tale of our conflict that was as old as humanity itself, with the unexplored world. Also, in that story, we were not simply observers, we were the heroes. A strange sense of routine took hold as the days turned into the nights and the nights into the days. Our existence in the wild. Our nighttime visitor stayed in the shadows to keep an eye on us, and its presence both frightening and strangely consoling. In a move that caught us off guard, the creature approached the fruit pile one evening we had overlooked. As it bent down and picked up an apple, we held our breath as we watched from our tent. Before taking a bite, it carefully examined the fruit and turned it around in its large hand. The sight was strange, the truth existing apart from everything else, leaving us both in wonder. The creature started interacting more with the things we left out over the next few days. It appeared to be interested, anxious to grasp the abnormal articles that populated its reality. We started omitting more things, like a compass inspired by these interactions, a flashlight, even a pencil and sketchbook. It was fascinating to observe the response of the creature. It seemed to be captivated by the flashlight, which it turned on and off with great interest, by the light emission. At some point, I chose to face a challenge. As the animal was locked in with the spotlight, I gradually rose up out of the tent, my hands raised as a sign of peace. The creature paused and fixed its gaze on mine. My heart beat in my chest as I moved forward. It did not retreat, which relieved me. All things being equal, it appeared to recognize my methodology, its look never leaving mine. Over the following days, Sarah and I alternated approaching the animal. It seemed to comprehend that we had nothing but good intentions and, surprisingly, began giving indications of what appeared to be trust. The evenings were not generally loaded up with fear yet expectation. The creature began visiting our camp in the dim moonlight after leaving the shadows. Its interest was clear, and our trepidation was gradually supplanted by a feeling of kinship. We were living with a legend, offering our lives to the animal that the world knew minimal about. Our collaborations were careful, however, progressively successive. We and the creature shared an unspoken understanding that connected the whole between us. On the 9th day of our encounter, I accomplished something that had previously seemed impossible. Ego. I approached the creature and extended my hand as it looked at a sketchbook. It looked from my hand to my face before pausing. There was a snapshot of wavering, then, at that point, gradually it expanded its own hand, its fingers brushing against my own, as a result of our efforts to bridge the gap that existed between our worlds. Without words, I felt a connection and mutual understanding. I was experiencing a moment with a creature that was as complex as it was, touching a legend, misunderstood. We had broken the obstructions, started a line of correspondence that depended on trust and respect. We were presently not simply spectators, we had turned into a piece of the animal's reality. A sense of wonder and curiosity had taken the place of the fear that had once ruled our existence. We were carrying on with a story that was past common, offering our lives to a being that was part of the wild, a component of the mystery that draws people to the wilderness. We were living the Bigfoot legend. After the underlying leap forward, our relationship with the animal Bigfoot as we had come to evolve, except it no longer looked at us suspiciously. Instead, a growing sense of comprehension had begun to emerge. Its instincts kept it at a distance, and it was still wary. However, the aggressive posture had subsided. One evening, as Bigfoot was attracted to the glow of our pit fire, I expanded my hand once more. It reached out this time with less trepidation. Its touch was unpleasant, the surface of its hand an unmistakable difference to mine. However, there was a tenderness to it, a watchfulness that was practically human. Days streamed into evenings and evenings into days, each loaded up with new collaborations, new encounters. We noticed Bigfoot intently, taking note of its way of behaving, its propensities, its quirks. It was a being of logical inconsistency, both crude and modern, wild, at this point delicate. We watched it explore the wild easily, its communications with the climate giving us useful insights into its way of life. Consequently, Bigfoot seemed to develop more agreeable around us. It watched us approach our day-to-day exercises, its interested look frequently waiting on our devices and the tools. Once in a while, it impersonated our activities, its endeavors at human-like way of behaving, both entertaining and edifying. One evening, we looked as it got the sketchbook and pencil we'd left out. It awkwardly held the pencil and looked at us as if it wanted our approval. Energized, it made a couple of strokes on the paper. The outcome was significant, albeit crude. It was an endeavor to impart, to communicate, to associate. As the days passed, we saw an unusual change in our dynamic. We were no longer able to observe Bigfoot. It had turned into a buddy, a companion. The trepidation had evaporated, supplanted by a security that rose above species. There were difficulties in our shared existence in the wilderness. There were days when the weather conditions turned unforgiving. Days when our food supplies ran short, days when we scrutinized our choice to remain. Be that as it may, through everything, we had Bigfoot. Its presence was always fascinating and comforting. Bigfoot came up to us one evening as we sat around the campfire. It overshadowed us, its outline illustrated against the sunset. It saw us, its eyes mirroring the fire's gleam. It then placed its hand on my shoulder in an unanticipated gesture. Even though the contact was brief, it said a lot. It was a declaration of our connection and acknowledgement. In its world, we were no longer intruders. Just as it had become a part of our lives, so too had we. As the flares of the pit fire gleamed, creating moving shaded areas on our countenances, Bigfoot, our friend in the wilderness, caught our attention. We came to the realization that we had accomplished our objectives. We had tracked down Bigfoot, yet more significantly, we had tracked down an association with a being that represented nature's mysteries, and we had learned something in the process about ourselves, our ability to comprehend, to adjust, to bond. Our narrative no longer centered solely on survival. Connection, comprehension, and coexistence were the themes. It was a story about people coming face to face with the wild. Every interaction strengthened our bond as our relationship with Bigfoot grew day by day. In the presence of one another, we experienced life, explored, and discovered. Our trepidation was supplanted by shared regard, and our endurance challenge transformed into an undertaking once in a lifetime. However, we were forced to face a harsh reality as our food supplies decreased. We couldn't stay in the middle of nowhere for very long. We had a day-to-day existence past the backwoods, obligations we were unable to overlook. We knew we had to go back to our world despite the amazing bond we had formed with Bigfoot. The choice was awful. We were torn between the extraordinary existence we had and the life we had always known. Tracked down in the wild, yet we realized we needed to leave. We had to say goodbye to our friend, which was hard. The most recent couple of days were a haze of readiness and despairing. As we packed our belongings, we gave the campsite that had been our home one last look. We took in the wilderness's beauty as we looked around, leaving etched memories of our time there into our souls. Bigfoot appeared on our final evening as the sunset cast an orange glow across the landscape, showed up at our camping site. With its massive silhouette silhouetted against the setting sun, it stood there. We could see a feeling of figuring out in its eyes. It appeared to be aware of our departure. With overwhelming sadness, we moved toward Bigfoot. We were overcome with emotion as we stood there facing it. With our gestures indicating our impending departure, we extended our hands toward it. Bigfoot gave us a softer look as it looked at us. After that, Bigfoot surprised us by extending its own hand and gently touching ours. It was a silent expression of comprehension and an unspoken farewell. We were overcome with sadness, gratitude, and a profound respect for one another. Bigfoot turned around and vanished into the wilderness with a final nod. We watched as it vanished, its figure disappearing into the forest's shadows, leaving us with a feeling of nothingness and a heart filled with memories. The remainder of our belongings were packed, and we began the return journey, each step echoing with the recollections of our time spent in the wild. An incredible tale of friendship, discovery, and connection was carried with us. We felt a pang of longing as we looked back one last time. We were abandoning a companion, a piece of our lives. In any case, we were taking with us a story that was nowhere near customary. We shared our existence with a terrifying creature and had lived with a legend. And intriguing, we had shaped a bond that opposed human perception, and in doing as such, we had found a section that was as wild and free as the wilderness itself was a part of ourselves. The wilderness, once a place of fear and unpredictability, was now just a memory of an amazing journey. We had also left a part of ourselves behind in the middle of that wilderness. Consequently, we had brought back a story of a phenomenal kinship, a story that we would carry with us throughout our entire lives. The wild, tranquil stillness of the forest was a stark contrast to the return to civilization. The clamoring city commotions and blazing lights appeared to be brutal, practically unfamiliar after our drawn-out nature immersion. The rhythmic songs of birds and the subtle rustling of leaves had become familiar to our ears. What's more, the irregular yet ameliorating presence of Bigfoot. The routine tasks of reintegration and catching up took up the days after our return. Up with work, taking care of stacked-up messages, and continuing our old schedules. However, in the midst of the noise of our daily lives, our thoughts kept returning back to Bigfoot in the heart of the wilderness. We imparted our story to our dearest companions, who tuned in with wide-looked interest and disbelief. We stayed quiet about the area of our experience, needing to shield our companion from the attack of interest searchers. The world wasn't prepared to acknowledge Bigfoot, not without upsetting its tranquil presence. We owed that much to them. We found comfort in one another, remembering our encounters through shared recollections and calm conversations. We shared a bond that had been formed in the ashes of an extraordinary event, adventure. It was a bond that wasn't simply between two individuals, however, among us and Bigfoot, between us and the secrets of nature. We felt a shift within ourselves even as we resumed our normal lives. We saw our environmental elements in an unexpected way, with a more profound appreciation for the regular world. A sense of respect for Bigfoot had been instilled in us by our encounter with him, the unsolved mysteries of nature. We frequently spent our evenings stargazing and reminiscing about our extraordinary friend. We pondered Bigfoot, about its singular presence in the wild. Was it taking a gander at similar stars we were? We could never be aware. In any case, we breathed easy because of the conviction that it was out there, living unreservedly in its reality, just like how we were in ours. Our adventure had begun as a straightforward camping trip and evolved into a journey that changed our lives. We had set out to explore the wilderness, but ended up discovering a legend instead. We had encountered dread, faced difficulties, and fashioned a special bond, a bond that spread over species. As we pushed ahead, we conveyed with us the illustrations we had learned in the core of the wilderness, reverence for the unforeseen, enduring bonds, and the extraordinary, the mystery of nature's beauty. Our return was not the end of our story. It persisted in our thoughts, hearts, and shared glances. We would carry that story with us, and it would shape our perspective and our choices and how we perceive the world. Bigfoot's encounter with us was more than just an adventure. It was a journey of understanding, connection, and discovery. We were on a journey, and it wasn't over yet. We did so with a new perspective and sense of purpose as we traveled the world, always contacted by the animal that abided in the shadows, everlastingly roused by our companion out in the open.